Welcome to the final review video for AP Psychology exam review. I'm super pumped to bring this to you guys so that you can really wrap up your review in hopes of having a better understanding of where the holes are in your understanding, right? If you've gone through these videos, hopefully you now see, okay, I need to study this area of Unit 2 and this area of Unit 4. So make sure you go back, rewatch, and get into studying some vocabulary. So in Unit 9, we're talking all about social psych and what you need to understand to be ready for the AP exam. So let's get started. The learning topics outlined here are the same ones that you'll find on your study guide. So make sure if you don't have that, it's linked below, but really you could just use a loose leaf sheet of paper and write down these learning topics really quickly. And then making sure that you understand you got to have a concept understanding of all of them and be able to apply them to a scenario, but then be able to analyze psychological research, that scientific investigation of attitude formation and change, which we're going to talk about first, and then conformity, compliance, and obedience. And we're going to talk about the 3 big research studies there, which makes sense because you've got to be able to analyze those research studies. So first, let's talk about attribution and attribution theory, which is where we attribute or find cause for someone's behavior. So fundamental attribution errors says that when we're looking at someone else's behavior, we normally make a dispositional, which is personality. We normally blame who they are as a human being rather than looking at their situation. Whereas a self-serving bias is that we use attribution theory to our advantage, and that when I do something well, it's because I'm amazing. It's a dispositional cause because I'm just amazing. Whereas if I mess up, no, that is not my fault that I got an F. It's because it was really cold in that room and my Chromebook wasn't charged, that kind of thing, right? Self-serving bias. False consensus is thinking that because you think one way, that everyone does. Ain't true. Confirmation bias, we've talked about that one before. If you don't know it, make sure you go over it. Just world hypothesis. This is a big one that leads to victim blaming, and that there is a hypothesis or a phenomenon. I normally call it the just world phenomenon, which says that we believe that the world is good and just. And therefore, when bad things happen to you, it's because you deserved it. Bad things happen to people who have done bad things. Good things happen to people who have done good things, and that leads to victim blaming. The self-fulfilling prophecy is a big one too, but make sure you understand that that's not just your own thought, because sometimes self-fulfilling prophecy can be confused with self-serving bias as well as stereotype threat. Don't confuse them. Get it clear in your brain. Self-fulfilling prophecy is when someone else has a prophecy about you or about another person, and they treat that person a certain way based on their thought, on their bias, that ultimately makes them fulfill that prophecy. So if a coach thinks that all freshmen suck, right, they're just awful, that coach is never going to play freshmen until, it's one of the last games of the season, let's say, and you're up by 48 in a basketball game or something, and then he plays a freshman. The freshman sucks because he hasn't gotten any playing time all year. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Cognitive dissonance, we've talked about in a previous video. We can talk a little bit more about it here, and that when there is a dissonance or a difference between our attitudes and our actions, our beliefs and our actions, that gives us anxiety, and we are motivated to make them the same. Okay? And so Leon Festinger is the guy who came up with this. And an example is, I believe smoking is bad for you. It's bad for me, let's say. And yet I smoke. I don't actually. I'm just giving you an example, right? One of those has got to change because I have anxiety around the fact that they do not match up. It's probably easier to change the thought than it is the behavior, especially when it involves a psychoactive drug like nicotine and you become physically addicted to it, right? And then attitude formation and change. This is a big one because remember back here, you've got to be able to investigate and analyze research studies in this area. So understanding central route to persuasion using facts about the item itself or what it is you're trying to persuade someone with. Whereas peripheral route is using other things like attractive speakers or attractive women on a car to get you to buy the car. And then this is the next one that you need for skill 3, understanding conformity, compliance, obedience, and the 3 big studies. Conformity, which is simply doing things because the group does. In Ash's line study, and how there were 9 Confederates in the room and the 10th person was a participant. And something like 62% of them conformed to what they knew was the wrong answer. Conformity is powerful. Compliance with things like groupthink, in that I just want to go with the group. It appears that everyone in the group is agreeing with the leader. And so I don't want to, wrinkle this. I don't want to create like a disturbance. So even though I think differently, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. That's compliance. And then there's obedience with Stanley Milgram's shock experiment, and that it actually wasn't a shock experiment, but is still unethical because the participants actually believe that they ultimately killed someone by electrocuting them to death. And even though afterwards they realize, okay, I didn't kill someone, you've seen Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio, right? Once a thought is there, it can't go away. It's really not a very factual movie, but I really liked that theme to it, and so that's why I bring it up here. And then Zimbardo's Stanford Prison Experiment doesn't necessarily fit in with any one of these 3, maybe with compliance, a little bit of obedience, but Zimbardo's Stanford Prison Experiment, where he took college students, made half of them prison wards, half of them prisoners, and tried to go for a long time, but ended only after days because of the effects of the experiment and how these normal, healthy, both mentally and physically, college students became essentially evil in days, within hours of assuming a role. And so you can watch TED Talks by Zimbardo now, read his books and all of that about, and there's even a movie, right, about how the role you assume will make you do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. And I don't want to say it makes you do things. It's you decide to do them, but it's a really powerful persuasion to make you do them. There's so many vocab terms for group influence, so please make sure that when it comes to social psych, you are studying your vocab terms. So making sure you understand the difference between the bystander effect and diffusion of responsibility. Bystander effect is the effect. It's what happens, in that as there are more people around, the likelihood of someone getting help decreases. It's almost like a negative correlation, but it's a negative relationship, in that as the number of people present around someone who's suffering goes up, the likelihood of them being helped goes down. That is most often because of diffusion of responsibility. In the minds of everyone in the scenario where the bystander effect is happening, in the minds of all those people, they were thinking, there's plenty of people around here, someone's bound to help, so I don't have to be responsible. Social facilitation is that as you are being observed, as like the more people that are present essentially, and you are performing a skill that you're generally good at, your performance increases. Group polarization says that upon discussing something, a group becomes more polarized. Now, what that means is if you're in a group of people who are like-minded with you, you will leave that conversation feeling even more extreme and committed to the thought that you are like-minded about. De-individuation is mob mentality. And so where there's anonymity, being in a big, huge group, meaning you're anonymous, you're likely to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. Social traps is where selfish behavior ends up ruining what could be a great scenario for everyone, with things like the prisoner's dilemma. And then superordinate goals is what is helpful in things like a prejudice existing scenario. People who have prejudices about each other, you give them a common goal that they're working towards, and that helps kind of dissipate the prejudices. Speaking of which, making sure you remember in and out group dynamics, the we versus they thing, understanding that when in groups and out groups exist, in-groups have a bias towards each other. If you're in my in-group, you're fantastic. If you're in the out-group, you are all the same, right? If everyone in the out-group has a different skin color for me, let's get serious for a second. They, don't use that word, right, when talking about a group of people, because that means you're committing the out-group homogeneity bias. You're saying that they all act and behave the same way. And then making sure you understand ethnocentrism, prejudice, discrimination, bias, how they all influence how we essentially treat people who might be differently from us. And then scapegoat theory, finding someone to blame, often based on your prejudices and discrimination. Mere exposure effect says that simply by being around someone will increase your affinity to them. Mere exposure effect. Altruism, with things like reciprocity norms, thinking I'll help you because you're going to eventually help me. The feel good, do good. If I feel good in life, I'm going to do good in life or in a certain day or moment of my life. Altruism being that unselfish regard for others and those behaviors that we might do because we just want to be nice to someone else. Aggression levels being found higher because of higher testosterone levels. And the research around taking out anger and aggression actually shows that that's not good because you're not solving the issue. You're just creating more aggression, which then creates more anger rather than solving why the anger exists in the first place. And then attraction factors, and that you're more likely to end up with someone who is proximal to you, close to you, and is similar in the big areas of your life. All right, guys, I hope that you found all of these videos helpful. I want to tell you that you're going to do great. If you're here and watching these videos and you are truly testing yourself, meaning you're not just going over these videos, taking notes, you're not just looking at flashcards. You're testing yourself, meaning you get on Quizlet and you take the tests. You take practice tests, but not even that. You give your flashcards to someone else and say, Dad, I need you to tell me the word and I'll tell you the definition. Don't let me look at the flashcards. That's testing yourself. You are not going to be able to use your information, right, your notes and stuff on the test in a normal setting. And even if you can, like if you're watching this for the 2020 exam, if you're relying too much on your notes, you're going to run out of time. So I'm telling you to prepare for this exam in 2020 as if you can't use your notes. If you're beyond 2020, right, focus on making sure you don't need your notes to know this stuff. Set your notes aside, talk to it out loud with someone, make sure you know it. And remember that you're more than a test, right? You're more than a test. Have confidence, take a deep breath, you're gonna do great. All right, guys, I hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.